Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Journey to Purpose. With me today, I have the curious and fascinating corporate anthropologist, Andi Simon. She helps corporates change their culture, and a lot more than that. Andi, welcome. Thank you for being here.
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me. It's going to be fun today.
It will be. First, really easy question is, where in the world are you?
Well, right now I live about 40 miles north of New York City, Manhattan, along the Hudson River in the Hudson Valley. But as you and I were talking, I travel about 1 to 2 weeks a month on either business talking or to travel for vacations. And so we are explorers. But I love living in the Hudson Valley.
It does, from what you described, it sounds lovely. But I also, as you know, support your travel and return to home to philosophy. I think it works well for me as well.
Well, and it's always wonderful to come home. And it's always curious about what I don't know and where I can go find out more about it.
Definitely. So let's get on to what I don't know, which is a lot about you. And tell me, what is a corporate anthropologist? What does that journey look like? How does it all fit together?
I made it up. I was, as an undergraduate, my father sent me off to college and said, "It's the last time you can be irresponsible." I wasn't quite sure what he meant, but I had no problems figuring that out. But one of the classes I took was in anthropology. And I had that aha moment when you go, oh, this isn't just interesting, and I don't just want to do it. This feels like who I am. The kinds of things that anthropologists do are to step out, be participants and observers, begin to understand humans. We're so complicated that it isn't easy to understand what we're doing. And while social sciences have a science part to it, there's a lot of rigor to the process. And so I got my PhD and I went to Greece and I studied Greek, particularly Greek women and migrate immigrants into the US. And I was curious about how people change. How do you adapt when you have left your home, come to a new place? And we're a nation of immigrants. And despite what's going on today, the complexity of becoming a person who has relocated and now established themselves is not easy. And then I took my daughters when they were 4 and 5 back to Greece to study Greek women some more. And I learned a whole lot about having children with you can open up doors playing as solo as you can. But then by chance, I had my tenure. I was doing television series. I felt pretty comfortable being an academic. My husband was an executive at Citibank going through deregulation. And I do think that our origin myths are our stories. But we were at a cocktail party and they said, "Why don't you come help us change?" And I said in my naivete, I could do that. I had no idea what banking was all about, and they had no idea what an anthropologist was all about. And so I took my skills, or lack of, and migrated into business world going through great transformation. It was not that different than watching immigrants coming to the country trying to rebuild a culture, rebuild their network, understand how to make a living. Well, here we had, 20,000 people who came to work. And I used to laugh because they came to work from 9 to 12 and 1 to 3. If they didn't steal, they had a job for life. And so you segmented the world and people came to work there for security, stability. Now they were being asked to be salespeople, service people, speak differently to customers. And it was really one of those great transformation periods. As banking got to become more of a business and less of a security there. I stayed in banking for 14 years. I was SVP of one bank, EVP of another bank, and they were all going through the challenges. It taught me a lot about change and humans. Humans are designed not to like change. We're protected from knowing that there's a lion around the bend, to be careful. Your amygdala hijacks it. Then by chance, I was recruited into healthcare. And I got in as an executive to help them adapt to managed care. And I spent 7 years doing that. And then after 9/11, I launched my own business. And my PR person was wonderful. And I said to John, "Who am I? What's my identity? I can do this and I can do that." But he said, "No, you're a corporate anthropologist that helps companies change." And I went, wow, in one sentence, you have caught my identity. And that's who I am. That's my brand. Let's build it. And I must tell you, I got clients almost right away, not because of who I was or what I did, but they were so frustrated trying to change a college, a healthcare client, a manufacturer. It didn't much matter the flavor. They were stalled or stuck. And that sort of took me on that journey of realizing that they weren't really hiring me because of how I was going to solve the problem. They just had a complex problem and none of the skills yet to figure out often what was right in front of them. And that was the joy of finding a lens that they could see through that was unfamiliar, and frightening. So rather than move into something where they weren't sure, how I gave them the security that said, it's where the opportunities are. If you're a college and you're shrinking, you need to find new students. How do we find
Hmm.
them? And they're there. And if you're a healthcare client and you don't take care of men, you're all focused on women, you're missing half the population. And growth isn't going to come from competing about the more women you had. There are only so many babies, but all the men who don't have any physicians. All kinds of interesting and often evident observations that didn't take long for me to see, but for me to change their minds took a long time. And trust is not easy when you haven't seen it. So I learned to take my clients out exploring with me. I said, come be an anthropologist. Let's go look at something. Let's go see what's actually happening with people using your product. And Philippa, they were fascinated. They said, well, they're not using it the way we designed it. I said, that's exactly the opportunity for you, because you're over engineering something, thinking that the more they have, the better, and they're using a third of it because that's all they can manage. And it's not that they're bad people. They just can't absorb. You're overcomplicating something that needs to be simplified. Interesting stories. And as I did that, my first book was called On the Brink. It was about how anthropology can help your business. And all of my books have been about challenges or change and how people can adapt to them. So that's sort of my story. And I enjoy telling it because there's no straight line or destination.
Mm.
It's a journey of really being curious and explorer and a bit philosophical about humans being curious meaning makers. What did they make meaning out of? And why is that so important?
I love that. And I think it's a really good point to make in terms of that journey is, and I say this a lot, life isn't linear. I certainly could not have planned the jobs, the careers I've had. And I joke that I change career every decade. I'm in my 40s now, and it's definitely, career 4, but not because I failed at other things, just because of that curiosity to go and keep learning, keep exploring, keep being challenged. And I think I love the lens that you bring with anthropology, because I do think social sciences can get overlooked in the real world. These are the subjects we go off and study because we love them. My first degree was history and Russian. And I know
Yes.
people are like, well, we get Russian, but why history? I was like, because I love history. And also because history is everywhere.
Yes.
Um, and different skills it brings you. But I love how you've made that transition. But you've talked about how, bank, you didn't know anything about banking, didn't know anything about anthropology. That sounds to me like it was actually a real advantage, because there's no expectation placed on what it is or
Oh,
isn't. But did you find as you progress, expectations followed you around because of what you had achieved in other places?
yes. Yes. And when they say fake it till you make it, I learned early that people carry a story about you that may or may not be the one that you would carry about yourself. And so I've learned how to manage expectations so that I can please them. And it wasn't terribly important if it was true or false. It was really important that they had a need, and I somehow fit into that box of solving it in different ways. I became many times, the first executive in a bank. It was a savings bank. I bought their first computer. I bought their first ATM. I launched them on whole new banking products, and I could because I didn't fit into any of their boxes. And they thought I really knew a lot because I had come from an urban bank into a rural bank. But it's been an interesting journey of trying to help people do something that they probably could do themselves. But to be the
Mm,
first, and women have learned this all along, it was often interesting to figure out how to be that person among a team of guys. I didn't want to be the code girl. I have a woman I know, and she's a wonderful woman, senior president of a company. And she talks about being the code girl, going into a large company, pitching their business, and they gave her all the coats to hang up, not knowing she was the president of this company. And so women have had an interesting journey of their own, trying to find a way to be valuable in industry and not to be imposed upon in roles that, I can take notes, sure, but should I be taking the notes? I can
mm,
make coffee, of course, and I can clean up afterwards. But why is it the woman who has to play the role of wife and mother for the guys in their room? I know they can make coffee because if I'm not there, they do just fine. But so I often think life is like theater. They put you into roles based upon their feelings of what's comfortable. And if you break through those roles, you don't want to play like a guy, but you want to be a strong, smart woman who can add value innovatively and, and accepted for that. Interesting.
yeah. It is. I mean, it reflects a lot of my career being I was in the military and also I joined corporates and in defense companies afterwards. And I was often the only woman in the roles that I did. And so, what you talked about, the person taking notes, the number of times I've taken aside colleagues and gone, I can, but I'm not the only person who can. And just because I'm female doesn't mean I should. And, in fairness to the particular people who've done that to me, 99% of the time, it wasn't a conscious thing they were doing. It was just a subconscious programming that they had got used to. And then sometimes I played in it. In fact, I've got a very good colleague who was a commercial lead, and she flew out to South Africa and she flew out with two men. And throughout this trip, this guy, unfortunately, was incredibly sexist. It basically ignored her, talked to these two men, not knowing that she was the boss. So they get to the end and she just goes with it. They get to the end and they go, and she looks here, this guy looks at the other men going, "Have we got a deal?" They go, and they look at Laura and go, "I don't know, Laura, what do you think?" And it's really interesting because I think, and you'll know this, I feel very lucky that I don't have to, I am just me. I've got comfortable in who I am, what that means for me as a woman. I don't match male energy. If I don't, I can do what I want to do. I am just me and I'm accepted. And I think I've been very lucky throughout my career. I have been accepted. But sometimes I find it tiring. So I'm doing a contract currently where basically they call me the adults and I'm the only woman again. And I'm like, I know it comes from a good place, but sometimes I wish you wouldn't treat me as your mum, because also you're all older than me. It's a funny world, isn't it?
Well, I learned to be patient because you begin to realize whether it's the immigrant who feels like the barbarian at the gate or the uncertainty of this unfamiliar, not sure, the folks just often don't know how to behave. And so the only way they can figure it out is to find a role lookalike of some kind, where they know how to talk to a woman in that context. But in this one, nobody's trained them or prepared them very well. And I'm hoping that this next generation, I don't know about in England, but in the States, I had an accounting client for 8 years, and 65% of the accountants today are women. But when I was working with them, there wasn't a partner who was. They're all
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Half the doctors now are women. Half the dentists now are women. 65% of the college students are women. And now the backlash, which is not surprising, about anti-DE&I is not I'm not surprised at all that there's a whiplash back again because, if the jobs aren't more abundant, then there's a competition for fewer of them. And that brings up all kinds of, you should stay at home, you should raise the kids. But you can't get the job done if I'm not there. All kinds of challenges. And humans are really interesting critters because they don't stop for a moment to think about it and they decide with the eyes and the heart. So if you don't fit, I remember when I got my first banking job, I went to Brooks Brothers and I bought a black suit, a white shirt, and a bow tie. And I said to my husband, "Do I look like the guys?" He said, "You look fine." And I took it off not too long after that, but there wasn't even a dress code. What is it that one wears when you're amongst all the guys and you're not the teller or the service rep or a branch manager even? And it's been an interesting, I hope the next generation for my granddaughters and my grandson provide a more balanced world for people to live in based upon what they can do and not their gender or their race or or all the other things you can put onto people to make them different from you.
Yeah, I love that. I agree. And I want to touch on the comparison you make about being an immigrant versus the change in culture and stuff. So I've lived abroad as part of my degree. I lived in Russia 20 years ago, a very different world to where we are now, but people are people, right? But I learned very quickly how important it was to try and build those networks, build those relationships, because it can be really, really lonely and isolating. Um, and as you say, in the current climate, there is a bit of a tribalism
Yes.
around immigration. And from an anthropological aspect, I suppose, you study people, you see their behavior. Are there key things that you wish people would notice about immigrants that they would notice if they're in a work environment that we should just be thinking about differently?
A couple of things in what you're talking about, because for you being in Russia, were outside, you were that barbarian more or less, and the only way they could figure you out is who did you belong to. Belonging is an extremely important safety factor for humans, and the question is, where do outsiders belong? Which is why they form communities amongst themselves, and it isn't just simply to arrange for marriages or to have supermarkets that cater to your food taste, But belonging is a human essential. And if you don't, then you find yourself lonely. And loneliness is really not happiness. You are you can survive, but humans need people. And they need people who are like them. And it goes right through life. And I've been doing a lot of work on men and women retiring. It's interesting to watch the genders try and find their own pathway after work ends. But it's an interesting part. The other thing is that you protect yourself in a we and them model. And I have a wonderful book that I found the other day. It's about we and them, and it's about us and the Neanderthals and how we probably use culture to outsmart them because they were more powerful than us. But we thrived and they didn't, although there's lots of Neanderthal blood in many of us. But it's interesting about human survival and evolution and how we have populated the whole world in many different flavors. Then, the people in Australia are very different than the people in South America. And so we've been able to remain human and yet be very different. And so we're pretty interesting creatures, aren't we?
We are, sometimes for the better of ourselves and sometimes not, but definitely. And I know so you've got a Substack and a book, isn't it, on rethinking retirement. And I love how it explores sort of the cultural, philosophical, dimensional life transitions. Where does this theme sort of come from? I mean, it sounds like it's an aggregation of your life's experience, really, but what was the drive for focusing on retirement?
What a great question. Thank you. Because the book came out 2 weeks ago, Think Retirement.
Perfect.
Not the end, it's the beginning of what's next. So context. My husband sold his business in 2011 after building it to the 5th largest in the U.S. in the educational testing business. And he called me and he said, we sold the business, but I'm not retiring. I'm joining your business. And I said, good, because I'm not retiring. And so the two of us are not retiring. And then a couple of years ago, I was invited to be an anthropologist and study people in pretty well-to-do senior living communities. The CEO was a big guru around quality, and she was getting bad quality scores. She says, I don't understand it. We gave them this beautiful facility, and the scores are terrible. So what is quality? What's happiness? For people who are spending, $10,000 a month, lots of money, and are unhappy. And so I became an anthropologist, and I went and lived there. And it taught me a lot about retirement, next stage in life, expectations, the people who were managing it. It was a culture, and each of them were different. I'll tell you about the middle class one first, because that was fascinating. Because almost all the people they gave me to interview, I said, let me hear their stories. Almost all of them had been put there by their children.
Right.
Because they no longer thought they could take care of themselves. One of my favorite stories there was a husband and wife who had been divorced for 30 years. And he had lost his second wife. She had died, and the children, grown, thought that the husband and the wife should live together after being divorced for 30 years, and she could take care of them. You can imagine the stories, you can't make them up. And I took them that, and another woman had a husband who had a stroke, and the kids thought this was better for her. She said, but it really isn't, because I have no real neighbors here, and I've got to hire someone so I can go out and shop. It was fascinating. But they had a common theme, which I feel like they were in prison. And this was their children putting them into a place where they weren't coming out again, not happy. So if they want to know why they're not happy, it may not have anything to do with the place itself. It has to do with the stage of life. The other place was completely different, very wealthy, very beautiful. And many of the men were there without a spouse. Some of the women had Alzheimer's, but some of the guys were and they were all chief somebodies. They had run a business, they were in banking, they had senior positions, and now they had nothing to do. And the lack of a daily structure. Now, the executive director said to me, I don't understand. We put on all these things and nobody comes out. So I said to the folks, they put on all these things and nobody comes out. Who wants to go to those things? And then, so what did they do? They found committees. What else do business people do? They created great committees. And they would meet on safety and on food and on entertainment. And they would bring their recommendations to the executive director. And I said, and then what happens? Well, he promptly deletes them. And I said to the executive director, they are trying to find purpose and daily structure. And they're giving you their wisdom. And they think they're still smart people. Yeah, but that's not their job. They're our residents. They don't decide what we do here. And so I went back to the management and I said, you're designing beautiful places, but you need to rethink the way you're building cultures in there. And you need to understand what these people are going through in their lives. One woman there had cancer. And the chief operating officer said, we're preparing them for the last stage of their life. And she said, bullshit, I want to party every night, and I want a band, and I want to. And so the disconnect between the 40-somethings and the 70, they weren't even that old. They were just there for, it seemed to be the right thing to do, to sell the home and move into something like this. That led my husband and I to think about, well, we're not going to retire. That's certainly not something we want to do. But what is this thing called retirement? Being who I am, curious, like you are, I started to interview people, and I reached out to somebody. I said, people who are retired. And he must give me 20 people. And I reached out to someone else and said, you know someone who's retired? Oh, I got it. I had 60 people who I interviewed, and it taught me a great deal. There were 60 different ways of retiring, and that was interesting. Challenge for us is people plan for their financial their financial retirement plan. Got it. But not for a life plan. They don't understand they're drifting into retirement, and they're not designing it. And in the absence, they find, and there are 4 themes that came out. One, they left their business card when they left the office. Now who are, I'm retired. You belong to this tribe called retired. Well, I guess I do, but I don't know what that means. And I said, no, and who are you? I don't know. And the second thing, I had one great story. This was a former client of mine who planned carefully for his retirement. He said, I didn't realize that every morning I go to the gym, I come home, I have my coffee, I have nothing to do. I said, okay, but you plan so well, but not for the day. I plan for the trips. And the third thing is, what's my purpose? I had purpose when I worked. I had structure. I had something to really give me a meaningful day, even if it wasn't what I wanted to do. Now I've got to figure it out. I don't know how to figure it out. And last, one woman said it so well. I worked for 38 years in this wealth management firm. I took care of all these people in their retirement. It was wonderful. Then I left. All my friends were there. They're not my friends anymore. I don't have any friends because I never made friends outside of work, and they don't think they don't have anything to talk to me about. That came up over and over again from guys and gals, that their work life wasn't really their other life. And so the book came about because it seemed to me time to begin to help people rethink retirement. And whether you do or not, you better think carefully about, this is the longest stage in your life with no plan. That's my story.
I mean, I think it's all fascinating. So my parents are both retired, but my mum retired at 69 because she was a teacher for all her whole life. And she retired when she'd had enough, not because, there was a time limit on her. My dad, sadly, we just had to put him into a care home because he's got quite advanced dementia, and he's not safe to be at home with mum, unfortunately. But as thinking about what you said about the different sort of activities and stuff, and for where my dad is, it's really good because they will bring in animals, they'll do different activities. It does feel very structured, but with a lot of stimulation, which is obviously really important for his brain still. But to get to that point where we were, because long story short, he got encephalitis, it sped up his dementia, it was very touch and go. And they put him into a temporary care home, which was awful.
Awful.
And it was awful because they didn't have any structure. They didn't do anything with them. And even though he, at various points in a given day, he is at different points in his life, his brain is still wanting to do things. And I saw him in this particular place, and it was only a temporary thing where we tried to find the right one. But I was like, I understand why people don't want to go to these places. And as a daughter, I don't want to see my dad in these places. There's nothing, like, the staff were lovely, it was clean, but it wasn't right for him. I think my reflection has been that, as you say, planning for retirement is a big financial drive, or what does the day-to-day look like? And so I compare my dad was a vicar at Church of England, so once he retired, he still kept doing some vicar stuff because he could still do that. My mum got involved with charities. She plays music, she goes to the gym, she's in a choir. I felt they had a very healthy post-retirement life. But to your point, we are living longer and living better.
Yes.
And I think that thought of planning hasn't occurred to everybody. My parents were naturally busy people with the roles they had. But in the past, you'd retire and die, pretty much in the UK anyway.
That's right.
And it's great that we're not. But what does your day-to-day routine, and I think also it's interesting for me, from a neuroscience aspect of and psychology of how important a routine is, because as you pointed out earlier in our conversation, we don't like change. No. Even though everything is constantly changing, we do not like it, and that routine is so important. Yes. To manage that. And so one of the things you talked about, I want to just pick up a bit more, is whether the retirement is voluntary or forced, and how it makes a huge difference to outcomes. Have you had to reframe, or as part of this work, did you help them reframe retirement when it wasn't their choice?
Yep. and I have a bunch of stories of both flavors, and none of them are without complexity. One woman had been a senior person at a large firm, and then she became an executive director of a large association. And out of nowhere, she was given 2 years' notice that she was having her job eliminated. They were going to find a replacement. And she had this wonderful quote. She said, "Andi, for the first time in my life, I have nothing on my calendar for the rest of my life." Now, and her story is wonderful because it was all success, success, and then emptiness. And not by choice or design. I haven't planned for this at all. So she was telling me how she's beginning now to take charge of. She's a sharp woman, and she realized that unless she takes charge of it, nobody's going to take charge of it. And so it's interesting. Her husband is perfectly happy being retired, having his coffee, reading the paper, and not doing much. And she said, we are at odds with each other because I'm a doer and he's relaxed. But retirement isn't a vacation. You can think of it that way, but usually vacations you come back from. So that's one where it wasn't intended at all. Another guy had a wonderful firm and he sold it to a larger firm because it was time and he wanted to protect his people and the assets he had made. And I love these stories because there were several folks who had built their own business. And he said, and I thought this would be great. I had 2 years to transition. And he said, first they gave me a nice office. And then they gave me a slightly smaller office. And then they asked me if I could really take this that looked like a closet office. He said, the symbolism finally got him. He said, I guess it's time for me to leave the office. And even though it was planned, in the 2 years he knew were 2 years, he didn't plan on moving out. He was perfectly happy being in transition. Well, humans hate that liminal stage betwixt and between. It's the most dangerous. Ambiguity is the most dangerous place for people. Give me black or white, but no gray. And so this is sort of like, but to a lot of folks, that seemed like a great transition, but they don't understand how, to your point, all of the things that make them who they are was caught up in what they had. And now they need to begin to rethink who they are in many ways, because we were on a wonderful trip as we like to take, and it happened to be with 20 other folks. We were the only folks still in business, and all of them were great retirees. That was the tribe. So we were immigrants to retirees, and they could tell us about what they had been, but not what they were. And they couldn't tell us much about what they were doing. They hadn't yet taken on a new identity. And my last thought for you, one of the things I've learned is that there's a honeymoon. Don't waste it. Between the time you leave May to the time that first year is up, people push into it all the frustrating things they couldn't do when they were working. They travel, they see their grandkids, they take up art classes, they think about all those things. It takes a year. Honeymoon. I just finished a podcast with a woman who took a year, and then she woke up one day and she got into serious depression, full of anxiety. She had nothing to do. And so the year was gone. All the plans were done. Now who am I? And what's the next part of my journey? Now, I think what's so interesting is that there are 75 million boomers in the U.S. That's a whole lot of folks going through loneliness, anxiety, unfamiliarity, not sure what's going on. It's going to be an interesting time for us to begin to figure it out with them, before them, or it's going to be very unpleasant time for American society. The churches are rising to it, and you'd be amazed at all the kinds of, one gentleman is building resorts for them to come to and have wonderful things for mature adults to do. It's a whole industry emerging. And I'm just happy to be helping people figure out why they're so unhappy. And I don't want them to be unhappy. They're in the best stage of their life, if only they seize the moment.
I think it's making me think about sort of identity in general. And something that I always have pondered a lot on is that autonomy versus community piece of, I want to belong to someone really, but I also want to do what I want to do. And who am I? Who does that make me? And I don't think I'm going to, I think it's an ongoing exploration for me personally. But one thing I was wondering about all these conversations you've had, is there anything in that research that really surprised you that you didn't expect to find?
Well, that's a good question. I went in sort of firm in my belief that I was never going to retire. And I wasn't quite sure what this world of retirement was. So each interview led to really good conversations with my husband about, let me tell you about what they're discovering. And I wasn't sure. I read a bunch of books that were more how-to books. If you Googled on videos about planning for retirement, all financial planning. The financial planners that I spoke to don't help their clients with life plans at all. So the things that surprised me was that there's this huge vacuum waiting for wisdom and process and fulfillment. And I think there's a whole industry of retirement coaches emerging, retired people helping retired people. I don't think it's going to be. I did my first workshop. I had 3 people, 3 women from across the country, one from Chicago, one from Milwaukee, and one from Oregon. They were as different as you can imagine. They became friends right away. They just needed someone to talk to who shared a common journey with them. One was a translator who traveled the world. She'd come back to Chicago to discover she didn't have any friends. And she wanted to spend more time with her grandson, but he was growing up. So expectations, it's sort of interesting. And one woman had a wonderful summer cottage and she was very busy all summer. Everyone came to visit. And all winter, she didn't have much to do. And the third woman had 18 to-dos on her to-do list. And she said, I don't know where to focus. And I'm laughing, but she was serious. And I said, well, let's see if we can figure out what matters now and why you matter. To whom do you matter? You know, it isn't just mattering. It's for whom. Belonging is not inconsequential. Who cares about you? It's an interesting time. So my curiosity led to, oh my goodness, if there are 75 million boomers, there probably are, 75 million different ways to do this. I'll tell you the ones that worry me the most are single women who have had good careers. And when they retire, one woman said to me, well, I don't play pickleball, mahjong, or canasta, and I don't have lunch with the women, and I don't have anyone to be friends with because I left them at the office. That's a lonely. You know, she's trying to rebuild a community when she isn't like them and knows she isn't. And they know she's not either. They don't even know what to talk to her about. Interesting.
So, I mean, that's a really good sort of segue into, for people who are listening who aren't retired yet, but maybe like me in their 40s or 50s, is there any 1 or 2 things that you've realized from these conversations that you think people of our age should start doing now to prepare for this?
Well, it's interesting. A couple of things. One of which is try to begin to organize your current life so that it will continue after work. You know, take a good look. If retiring means leaving work, it doesn't have to. Begin to think through what interests you. If you're going to be on boards, why wait? You know how many people want to be on boards? 75 million of them. How many boards? The not-for-profits. One not-for-profit said to me, I almost have to hire someone to handle all the retirees who want to come help me.
Oh, goodness.
And they're retirees all can't wait to do their not-for-profit work. So you got to be a bit realistic. The second thing is talk to people who are retired. Find out how you need some role models, and there aren't any wandering around. And then the last thing is, if you're going to begin to change your weekly rhythm, what do you want to keep and what don't you? You know, I have in my workshop, I have a process for designing the day you'd like to live. Plan it out. What kinds of things are you going to do that are going to be meaningful? Be aware of what's coming. If we live 20 years longer, you retire at 65 and you go, my father went to 100. That's a long time with no plan. And even if the plan changes, you're better off starting with something than with imagining. And my last thing is, all that freedom isn't necessarily a gift. You know, freedom without structure, humans can't function for very long. You wander around trying to figure out what to do. One of the women in the group said, I started watching TV. I hate TV. There was company in the house. At least there was a sound. I said, don't underestimate the need for voices. And she was cute. She said, now I'm going to the senior living place where my parents are, because we have multiple generations. And she started to develop a tech program for seniors. And she was telling them, of course, and she was talking about Zoom and all kinds of things. And then when it was over, they all lined up and asked her to fix their iPhones. And she realized that they didn't want tech. They just wanted to fix their phones. It was interesting. But for you who are still working, don't wait. Plan. You know, begin to think about this at least enough so that it's not a whole surprise. I'm not a surprise person. But I also think you don't need to retire. I love the people who are working 3 days a week. Something called return. There are a bunch of programs being put out by large companies for you to get projects back there. And it's almost like a rehiring process. I have a cousin who is an attorney in the New York City school system, and she's working 3 days a week, retired too. I mean, she's happy. She's got enough to keep her busy and enough time for herself. I think time is what people are looking for. And if time is important, how are you going to enjoy it? And then how are you going to balance it?
It's funny because it's really echoing what I've been going through recently. I've been working on a very intense contract. for a lovely company down in London, and I have put a lot of my stuff on hold because they were in a difficult position. They're no longer in a position, and they want to keep me to stay on. And I've kind of gone, okay, so what do I need? I feel like I sacrificed my life to do this job, and that's okay. But that can't go on. And I've also questioned myself going, but am I being entitled thinking that I should have a life outside of work? That like the inner student in me going, I just want a party, or actually what I actually want to do is go to an afternoon party and be in bed by 9. I don't want to have late nights, but like, I don't mind the odd little, boogie on the dance floor somewhere, but just not after 9 o'clock. But what you're saying, I think really resonates because it's been what I'm thinking going like, how do I live? And I read somewhere else, someone going, don't wait until you retire to do all the things that you think you want to do when you retire. So I've been trying to
Yes.
do that. It's just fascinating. But for you personally, and obviously you're going strong with the work still, have you changed anything about your own life, your own routine since doing this work?
Well, it's interesting. Going back to your point about having life and work, from the time my daughters finished college, my husband and I, he was in his business, I was in mine. I said, tell you what, every 90 days we're going on a trip. I'm not going to wait till I retire. I don't know if I retire, I'll be healthy enough to go on a trip, but I'm an
Mm.
explorer, and you and I like to travel. We've been to 40 countries. And nobody missed us. We were in Vietnam and we worked on a client's project. We were in Normandy and worked on a client's. Nobody cared where I was. If you have to be in the office, it's different. But for us, we made sure we rode horses. We fox hunted. And so part of our life was around the horses. My daughters rode, my granddaughters ride. So there was importance there. We took up golf because I got my back broken by a horse. And so I figured I needed another option. I rode after that, but golf has become a real good surrogate for it. But you need something where you can find people, you can enjoy their company. I'm not a mahjong player, canasta player, but give me a good game of golf and I just, but it gives you something, and there are two parts to it. It's something to work on. I like to practice, and it's something to socialize around. And so it gives you some intentional, and I like intentionality. So as you're a young woman, intentionally, what am I missing from the life I'm living that I'd like to explore? And people say, I want to start to paint. I said, I've been painting for most of my life. I mean, I had paintings here I did when I was in high school. And so don't wait. There's no need to. Um, and it's for working women. I was a professional with 2 young children, and they've all grown up to be professionals with growing up young children. And they all say to me, "What would women stay at home for?" I said, "I don't know. I haven't figured that one out." I grew up with a grandmother who was a professional and a mother who was. So there's lots of models, but I
Yeah.
have not met too many retired models. And so part of this was to make sure that I wasn't missing something. Am I missing something that I should be paying more attention to? The people I worry about are the ones who hated work. They are so glad to get rid of it. I'm not sure they're going to love retirement. I'm not sure they're happy.
Interesting.
But when they define work was awful, I hate what I'm doing. I've been doing it for 40 years. I'm sorry. It's a whole life. What next?
Makes sense. I love that. You've also got your own podcast, I think, On the Brink with Andi Simon.
Hmm.
Is that still running? Can you just a bit? What's that about, and how's that sort of
Yep.
serving you as well now?
I think yesterday I published my 468th version. And so
Congratulations.
I've been doing it for 8 years. When my first book came out, On the Brink, with a fresh perspective, a fresh lens to take your business to new heights. It was about how anthropology helped business grow. And there were 8 clients in there who had gotten sucker stalled. And my PR person said, you need a podcast. Now, this is 8 years ago. And I said, well, put me on some and let me see what they were. So they did. And in those days, they had a pretty typical, you're 3 questions. Give me 3 questions. I ask you 3 questions and done. I said, well, I can do better than that. And so I started and I fell in love with the podcast. I'm not monetizing it, although I've just started to put some advertising on it through um, the system that I'm using. They said, would you like to have some ads? And I said, sure, why not? If I don't have to go find them. And my ad this morning was on Amazon. And I went, oh, how interesting. Classy. But because I like to share, it's all about people's stories, very much like your own, which is why I'm enjoying today so much. But there's so much wisdom to get people, and I set it up. I
Mm.
want to get you off the brink. And the only way you can do that is to hear how other people have done it. You need your role models. You need your wisdom from others. And of all of them, I think only one I didn't publish because I didn't like the story at all. And I didn't like the man who was telling it. But by and large, it's been fun. And they're half hour. and I Zoom it, and it is joyful. Now I'm moving the conversations. I put it one out a week. I'm moving the conversations to more of the folks in the retirement book. They have great stories, and some people read, but some people hear, and some people see. And then my Substack is a place to share, and I like to share. So I'm having fun. It's great.
I think that's the main thing, and I completely echo. I do this because of the stories I hear, and the things that I learn, and the thoughts that come to me or that challenge me from other people. It's such a privilege to do it. So I am truly pleased that you took the time, but also I'm pleased that you've got your own outlet as well.
And I know
Now,
you enjoy doing it as much as I enjoy doing it. And I think that sharing, I get so many great notes back from people. Can you bring this person on? Or I think we were ranked 18th among the top 100 podcasts on the topic of change. And I went, really?
wonderful.
And it was by a third party. I said, how'd you do that? And that, well, we love your podcast, and that's what it's about. You're a futurist. I said, I know I was a futurist. And so, see, I've been named all kinds of things I didn't know I was, but I'm enjoying the journey.
That's the main thing. If people want to find you, work with you, grab your book, your podcast, where's the best place for them to do that?
I have two websites. One, the easy one is andisimon.com, A-N-D-I, Simon.com. And the other one is simonassociates.net. AndiSimon.com has all my books and programs, and Simon Associates talks about all the consulting work that we do. And then there's always LinkedIn. And LinkedIn, I am pretty sure I'm under Andrea Simon there, but sometimes I think I'm under Andi Simon. But I think LinkedIn has given us the gift of a directory, and it makes it easy for people to find us. And I can certainly put up info at andisimon.com is one email, and a Simon at simonassociates.net is another. And I encourage people to reach out and have a conversation. You know, you don't know. Your model is wonderful. I often think that the door's open and you never know what's on the other side. And so you walk through it, and sometimes it's a good one and sometimes it's not. But, who knows, right?
Absolutely. The thing I learned from the army was that there are no wasted experiences. You can always learn something. You may not always enjoy it in the moment, and you may lie to yourself after the moment even, but there's always lessons to be learned and knowledge to be acquired.
I'd love to share your story. Perhaps we'll talk about doing one on my podcast.
Sounds amazing. All I can say is thank you so much. I've really thoroughly enjoyed this. I think you're the first anthropologist I've had on, which is also very exciting. But I appreciate the time, and I look forward to following you more of your work as things continue.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. You're a wonderful podcaster, and I've enjoyed every minute today. Thank you.
Thank you.